The number of people who've died from COVID-19 across the United States has passed 1 million since the first case reported in Washington state just over 2 years ago. That's according to a count by NBC News, which Wednesday became the first major U.S. media outlet to report the gruesome milestone. By all accounts, the true toll is far higher, nearly 1.3 million deaths, according to the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, which reports the U.S. likely surpassed the 1 million mark last December. While COVID-19 deaths have slowed in recent weeks, cases are rising in all but 4 states, and about 360 people continue to die of the disease in the United States every day. In Ukraine, air raid sirens sounded overnight in every region of the country as Russia's military launched attacks that the Pentagon said were aimed at critical infrastructure. Russian bombs and shells fell on power plants, fuel and ammunition depots, railway stations, even an amusement park in Kharkiv, where one woman was injured by shrapnel. This comes as the Associated Press reports Russia's bombing of a crowded theater in Mariupol on March 16th likely killed about 600 civilians who were sheltering inside, far more deaths than previously reported. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling for a prolonged truce to rescue about 200 civilians and Ukrainian fighters who remain holed up in the massive steel plant in Mariupol. Russia's military claimed it would halt bombing the plant for 3 days to allow for a humanitarian corridor. Ukraine says Russia's reneged on similar pledges in the past. In Moscow, the Kremlin has denied President Putin is preparing to formally declare war on Ukraine during a military parade scheduled for May 9th, Russia's Victory Day. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says lawmakers could vote as early as next week on President Biden's request for $33 billion more in aid to Ukraine, including another $20 billion for weapons and ammunition. The bill has bipartisan support on Capitol Hill. This comes as the Associated Press reports the rush to arm Ukraine has depleted the U.S. vast stockpile of weapons. Meanwhile, the New York Times reports the U.S. is providing Ukraine's military real-time intelligence that it's used to target senior Russian officers. Ukraine claims it's killed approximately 12 Russian generals on the front lines. A new report finds world hunger surged to a record high in 2021, even before Russia's invasion of Ukraine earlier this year exacerbated a global food crisis. The EU and the United Nations released the Global Report on Food Crises Wednesday. It finds 193 million people in 53 countries or territories face acute food security last year. That's a 40% rise from the previous record level set in 2020. Ethiopia, Madagascar, South Sudan, and Yemen suffered the highest levels of hunger. Speaking during a visit to Nigeria's capital, Abuja, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said 2022 is poised to set new records for world hunger as Russia's invasion of Ukraine disrupts wheat production and pushes global food prices even higher.
There is really no true solution to the problem of global food security without bringing back the agriculture production of Ukraine and the food and fertilizer production of Russia and Belarus into world markets despite the war. And I'm determined to do everything to facilitate the dialogue that can help achieve these objectives.
After headlines, we'll look at how Russia's invasion of Ukraine is leading to a growing hunger crisis across Africa. California Governor Gavin Newsom's proposed an amendment to a state's constitution to enshrine the right to abortion. The proposal follows the leak of a draft Supreme Court opinion this week that indicates a majority of justices are prepared to strike down Roe v. Wade. On Wednesday, Governor Newsom told a crowd outside a Planned Parenthood clinic in Los Angeles, California, will remain a safe haven for pregnant people seeking abortions, even as he warned the Supreme Court is poised to revoke other civil rights gains like marriage equality.
This Supreme Court is poised to roll back constitutionally protected rights. And don't think for a second, this is where they stop.
In Texas, top Democratic Party officials are continuing to support conservative Democrat and incumbent Congressmember Henry Cuellar, despite his long-standing opposition to reproductive rights. On Wednesday, Majority Whip Jim Clyburn, the number 3 House Democrat, traveled to Texas to stump for Cuellar at a Get Out the Vote rally. Cuellar is anti-abortion, pro-gun, and has backed private prisons, drone surveillance, and increased border security. He faces progressive challenges Jessica Cisneros in a tightly contested primary election runoff that ends May 24th. Cisneros was endorsed by the AFL-CIO, Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's a supporter of Medicare for All, the Green New Deal, and reproductive rights. On Wednesday, Cisneros called on Democratic Party leaders to withdraw their support for her opponent.
At every turn, my congressman has stood in opposition to the Democratic Party agenda, from being anti-union to being anti-choice. And with the House majority on the line, Cuellar could very much be the deciding vote on the future of reproductive rights in this country, and we just cannot afford that risk.
The Federal Reserve has raised U.S. interest rates by 0.5 percentage point, the largest increase since 2000. Fed Chair Jerome Powell said Wednesday the widely anticipated interest rate hike would help the U.S. economy beat back inflation, which is at a 40-year high. A comparatively low U.S. unemployment rate has led employers to raise wages to attract new workers, while disruptions to supply chains caused by the pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine continue to push prices higher. A psychologist who helped the CIA develop its torture program testified at Guantanamo this week about waterboarding a Saudi man at a secret CIA black site in Thailand. James Mitchell said the prisoner, Abdulrahim al-Nashiri, became so broken after the waterboarding sessions that he would voluntarily crawl into a small wooden confinement box. Al-Nashiri is accused of being the mastermind of the USS Cole bombing. He was first detained in 2002, then held at 10 secret CIA sites over a 4-year period before being transferred to Guantanamo. An Irish judge has ordered 2 members of U.S. Veterans for Peace to pay just over $10,000 for protesting at an Irish airport used by the U.S. military to refuel planes heading to the Middle East. The veterans, Ken Mayers and Tara Kauf, who are now both in their 80s, entered the airfield on March 17, 2019, to inspect U.S. planes on the runway while carrying a larger banner that read, quote, U.S. veterans say respect Irish neutrality, U.S. war machine out of Shannon Airport, Veterans for Peace. On Tuesday, a jury in Dublin convicted them of interfering with the operation at Shannon Airport. They were acquitted of 2 other charges. Back in the United States, the House Select Committee investigating the January 6 assault on Congress has released text messages of Donald Trump Jr. pleading with the White House to condemn the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on the day of the riots. In one text message to White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows on January 6, Trump Jr. wrote, "We need an Oval Address. He has to lead now. It has gone too far and gotten out of hand," unquote. The text messages were released as Trump Jr. reportedly met privately with the January 6 committee to answer questions. Meanwhile, 2 New York Times reporters have released new audio tapes of House Republican Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy recorded 2 days after the insurrection. In the recordings, McCarthy's heard talking with an aide about the possibility of invoking the 25th Amendment to remove Trump from power. McCarthy appeared to oppose the plan largely because it would take too long to implement.
I think the options that have been cited by the Democrats so far are the 25th Amendment, which is not exactly an elegant solution here.
That takes too long, too. It could go back to the House, right?
Days after those remarks, the House voted on a resolution calling on the vice president to activate the 25th Amendment to remove Donald Trump from office. Just 1 Republican congressmember voted in favor of the measure. In labor news, workers at more than 50 Starbucks stores have now voted to unionize. Starbucks Workers United has won union elections in 54 of 60 elections, a 90% win rate. The company is now fighting back by offering to increase worker wages and training, but only at non-unionized stores. This is Starbucks billionaire CEO Howard Schultz.
Partners at Starbucks U.S. company-operated stores where we have the right to unilaterally make these changes will receive these wages and benefit enhancements. This covers more than 240,000 Starbucks partners at roughly 8,800 Starbucks stores across the country. We do not have the same freedom to make these improvements at locations that have a union or where union organizing is underway.
In response, Starbucks Workers United has filed a formal charge with the National Labor Relations Board. Stephen Greenhouse, the former New York Times labor reporter, tweeted, "This smells like illegal discrimination against union members for having dared to defy Howard Schultz and unionize. I predict the National Labor Relations Board will move quickly to find this a nationwide violation of federal law and will order Starbucks to give unionized baristas the same wage increases," unquote. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has tested positive for coronavirus. State Department spokesperson Ned Price said Wednesday Blinken will isolate at home according to CDC guidelines.
The good news is that he is fully vaccinated, he is boosted, he is experiencing only mild symptoms.
Blinken met Wednesday with Swedish Foreign Minister Ann Linde shortly before his positive test result. A day earlier, he met with Mexican Foreign Secretary Marcelo Ebrard. On Saturday, Secretary Blinken joined a crowd of 2,600 celebrities, journalists, and Washington elites who packed the White House Correspondents Association dinner in Washington, D.C., where few in attendance wore masks. The event has since been linked to a growing number of COVID cases, including journalists with Voice of America, NBC News, CBS News, and Politico. Also testing positive was ABC News correspondent Jonathan Karl, who was seated next to the reality TV star Kim Kardashian. Karl also interacted briefly with President Biden, who attended without wearing a mask. The comedian Trevor Noah addressed the crowd, opening with these remarks.
It is my great honor to be speaking tonight at the nation's most distinguished super spreader event. No, for real, people, what are we doing here? Let's be honest, what are we doing? Like, did none of you learn anything from the gridiron dinner? Nothing, huh? Like, do you read any of your own newspapers? I mean, I expect this from Sean Hannity, but the rest of you, what are you doing here? You guys spent the last 2 years telling everyone the importance of wearing masks and avoiding large indoor gatherings. Then the second someone offers you a free dinner, you all turn into Joe Rogan.
The World Health Organization estimates the COVID-19 pandemic has caused the deaths of nearly 15 million people around the world. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman, joined in New York by Democracy Now! Co-host Nermeen Sheikh. Hi, Nermeen.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.